What's going on, Javi Lobby? It's your boy Javier with the Javier Show. Make sure you say it twice. All right, it's time for what I would call a deep discussion. It's time for a heart to heart and to really dive deep into the psychology and the mindset of what's going on with the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Now, I've been hesitant to speak on this because, for one, I take it too personal. I'm not speaking in terms of people out there screaming and shouting about whether he's guilty or not guilty of the crime that he's been accused of. I'm talking about being someone who was a troubled child, who got into a lot of trouble and made a lot of mistakes as a young person. And it led me down some dark paths and got me in a lot of trouble. But the thing here is the reason that I've tried my best to avoid having this conversation about Kyle Rittenhouse and everything that's going on in the media, politics, and the case in specific is because I really do think that politics is something that should never really be taken too personal if you're going to be somebody who speaks about these things and tries to make sense of it all. Of course, politics is a very passionate thing and it affects people's everyday lives. Not taking that away from anybody, but if you're going to be somebody who has conversations about real situations that have real implications in the world, we should try to always do it under the best good faith argument and from an objective stance based on the evidence and the things that are presented to us. So for that reason alone, I tried to avoid having this conversation because I just did not like the fact that this Kyle Rittenhouse case became so hyper political. And I'm going to sit here and be the first one to say it if others haven't said it, but I don't believe that the Kyle Rittenhouse case is political at all. And I'm going to explain further, and I'm going to break down why I believe this is the case and why I think that any of you who have been following the case or know anything about it, why you should take my advice and why you should see it the way that I see it. All right. The best way to do this is to explain the problem with this whole situation. Why is it that we're focused on the Kyle Rittenhouse case over all the other things that goes on in our country? If anybody pays any attention, you'll quickly realize that there are certain cases that get much more attention in the national media than other cases. I point out not too long ago during the George Floyd protests and riots that a black police officer was actually killed. Some people broke into, I believe, a pawn shop and gunned down a black retired police officer who was working security that night. I haven't heard too much buzz about that case. There hasn't been a national call to find out who these people were and to convict them and hold them accountable to the fullest extent of the law. It didn't become hyper political. People didn't try to take this as a case that they should use to hammer home their political positions. I find it very ironic that people genuinely tend to align with their political sides when it comes to whether or not you think Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty of what he's been charged with or not guilty. I find this to be very, very much a testament to the times that we're living in. And it's no secret that we've become very, very, isolated in our thinking, very divided in how we approach these political problems that we face in America and even across the world. With Donald Trump coming into office and the controversy that surrounded him, with President Obama leaving the office and all the controversy that surrounded him, with Joe Biden now being in office and all the controversy that surrounds him, it's no secret that we have reached a place in America where very little that we find in common with the other side of the fence that we don't sit on. But there are some things that should not be political. There are certain things that should not be politicized or used to gain political favor or political points. And I truly do believe that the Kyle Rittenhouse case is one of those. And I'm going to explain this very simple. When it comes to the law is written in a certain fashion where the judge, the lawyers, and the jury have to determine for themselves how to best interpret those laws to convict someone of a crime. I noticed that a lot of people are making the argument that Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there that night and he was carrying a firearm illegally. Based on what I have been able to research and understand, the first thing about the gun being illegal, it is my understanding that in that state that somebody under the age of 18 is legally able to carry a firearm, which happens to be a rifle that has a barrel at least 18 inches long. It is also my understanding that Kyle Rittenhouse did not own that gun. The gun was given to him, and that is the exact gun that he used. Some would say self-defense, some would use the word murder. I prefer to avoid that term because I genuinely do not honestly believe that Kyle Rittenhouse went there to literally murder people. Now, for those of you who might be sensitive to the left side of the spectrum who believes that Kyle Rittenhouse should be convicted to the fullest extent of the law for a murder charge, and you might be tempted to actually tune out at this point, but I would implore you that you do not. I would highly recommend that you actually take the time to hear out what I have to say. People who go to commit mass shootings usually go there with one intention, and that is to inflict as much damage as possible on the people that they want to victimize. It is very clear that Kyle Rittenhouse had no intentions of just going there to slaughter people. Whether or not you believe that he should be convicted of murder or he should be let off and the case should be dismissed due to self-defense, one fact cannot be disputed. If Kyle Rittenhouse went there to be an active shooter, I'm pretty sure he could have done much more damage and he could have shot more people at a much better rate and at a much better strategic position than what he was currently seen doing in the videos that we have evidence of. So that should not be up to dispute. Now, the other thing that people bring up about the Kyle Rittenhouse case is that he shouldn't have been there in the first place. The reason that I believe that this is a bad argument when it comes to justifying him being accused of murder and being incarcerated and serving time for that is because this is the same argument that people would use when they call victim blaming. Why do we have to take into account all the situations that led to a moment where a person had to defend themselves? I'll use this perfect example. If a person committed a crime and they got locked up and went to prison, and they're surrounded by other prisoners and inmates who are, let's be honest, violent, could be very, aggressive people. And this person who committed this crime and ended up in this environment with these people found themselves in a situation where these people were trying to harm them. It could be rape. It could be trying to kill them. It could be a multitude of things. Would you then say because that person made all the wrong decisions that they shouldn't have been there in the first place, that somehow does not justify them defending themselves, even if it ends the life of the aggressors? No one would logically make that argument. The same reason why if a woman is victimized by a certain act, no one should point out the fact that she shouldn't have been wearing a certain dress. She shouldn't have had her certain private parts showing. No one would. The moment you start to go down the list of all the things she could have done to avoid being in that circumstance or situation, you would be accused of what they would call victim blaming. But we see some of the same people who created this term, who utilized this term in so many different facets, are now turning around, blaming Kyle Rittenhouse for defending himself, all due to the fact that he should not have been there in the first place. That is a flawed argument, flat out. And that's how I see it. And I really do believe that any person thinking rationally on this situation would come to the same conclusion. Now, we also have to pay attention to the politicization, the people who have an interest in making this case national news and bringing attention to it. Race has made its ugly head into this conversation. We know that Kyle Rittenhouse is a Caucasian male, and the three people who were shot that night, two of them who died and one who was injured, were also white men. It just so happens, under the circumstances, that they were at what people would call a Black Lives Matter protest. Some would call it riots. I don't really care what you call it. It has no difference or any weight when it comes to what actually took place the moment aggression began. Who was the first person to get physically violent? That is the question. Let's grant that Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there. And there is a litany. There is so much that I can agree with that argument. Kyle Rittenhouse probably shouldn't have been there that night carrying that firearm. I'm 100% with you on that. But what are all the situations surrounding the context? Like, why is it that Kyle Rittenhouse was down there in the first place? We've noticed that there were riots and looting, there were protests going on, and people property were being damaged. People were being harmed in these situations. And then there were other people who took it upon themselves that they felt as if the police were not being able to do their job. So it was up to them to go out there and defend other people's property. I would argue that that was a foolish mistake. Does that then make Kyle Rittenhouse guilty of the charge? Of course it doesn't. It would just make him at the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. Now, some would say those reasons have to do with him intentionally looking for an altercation. But we see other videos of him actually not committing in aggressive fashion. He was trying to help people with medical situations. He was talking to the media and having conversations with them. This by no means gives the signal that this person is there for one reason, to be an aggressor. Now, I would hope that we can also agree on that fact as well. The reason that this has become political and race has entered the equation is because there is people on both sides who have an interest in the division, because the division feeds political points and votes. I am going to make the accusation that it most definitely benefits the left more than it benefits the right in this situation. The narrative that Black people are constantly being victimized and mistreated and treated differently in the court of law than white individuals is a strong narrative on the left, which has warrant. We cannot sit here and ignore the fact that Black men are disproportionately mistreated in the court of law compared to white men for the same crime. Now, once you take in account the history of the defendant, you take an account of all the factors surrounding the crime. Of course, it is not the exact same crime in many of the cases, but they're very similar, where Black men tend to get over sentenced or harshly treated versus a white individual. We can grant you that and still not make Kyle Rittenhouse case political. And the reason that is because once you decide that you want to treat people individually as individuals and not as members of their group, which I would implore that most Black people do not want to be stereotyped or discriminated against because they belong to a certain racial group. So you should sympathize with this argument. Kyle Rittenhouse should not have to pay the price for what all white people did at some point in history. Kyle Rittenhouse also should not have to pay the price for those disparities that we see within the law. Nobody should be punished based on their group identity. And the best way to go about instilling that is not practicing that behavior yourself, even if it was done to you. Two wrongs do not make a right. It never, ever really does. And we end up in a situation where tit for tat and nobody wins at the end of the day. Now, I want to address the fact that because we are here now, and I've had these conversations with people behind the scenes, other people who speak about politics, who have podcasts, who have YouTube channels. I've talked to family members and friends about these situations behind the scenes, and I never really wanted to get on camera to discuss it because I know that tensions are high, that people are upset, and people are justified in their behavior and their mentality. Everybody believes that they have the right answer on this situation, and therefore anything that goes against that narrative is quickly being shut down. Well, that doesn't have to be the case. And the reason that I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse should not be convicted of the crime that he's charged with is in every situation that he fired that gun, it was due to him being attacked at the moment. If you want to make the argument that everything that led up to the initial reaction of him using that firearm against the first aggressor, you can argue all day about why the situation happened. But what you cannot argue is that once a person is in a situation where they are not the original aggressor, that they have the right to defend themselves. We've seen cases where people say, well, he could fight them off. He could have done other things instead of using his firearm first. That argument doesn't necessarily hold up, because what we're doing then is putting ourselves into somebody else's mindset or telling somebody that they should have behaved in a way that you would behave. And we all know that we all respond to fear or we respond to violence differently. Kyle Rittenhouse made the decision that he did. The question then is, was he justified when he took that action? Regardless if you think he should have took a different action, was he justified when he did take the action that he took? I honestly do believe that he was. Now, once you move past the original aggressor, once Kyle Rittenhouse had to use force against the first aggressor, we end up in a situation where he is now being chased by a group of people who are trying to go after him. I am very understanding of the argument that these people may have been under the impression that he is an active shooter and that he just shot someone, and they have an obligation to try to stop him because he might possibly shoot someone else. If that is the situation, well, what we end up with is two sides who are both justified in their behavior. Kyle Rittenhouse cannot read their minds, and they cannot read his mind. Many of these people may not have been aware of what previously took place and what caused the shooting in the first place. So they're acting off of their own initial assumption. We talk about a lot with guys with good guns stopping guys with bad guns. If these people actually believe that they were stopping a bad guy with a gun, then they are justified in trying to stop him. That puts us in a hell of a situation. And the reason that is because now you have two sides who are genuinely convinced that they are justified in the behavior that they're about to take. It just so happened that Kyle Rittenhouse was the one who got the upper hand when this whole altercation began with the second and third guy who attacked him. Whether it was just or not, one would have to ask, based on the circumstances and the situation that we currently have ourselves in, did Kyle Rittenhouse genuinely believe that he was acting in self-defense? And was he acting in self-defense? I would have to default to yes, he was. My position on this has nothing to do with what political positions that I hold or ideologies that I have. We should be able to have this discussion within the frame of the law and decide for ourselves what is the proper outcome here. Luckily, many of us are not sitting on the jury and have to make this decision. It is a tragedy anytime anybody is killed under any circumstances. It is a tragedy. It is also a tragedy when somebody has to kill someone in the situation of self-defense. I don't see Kyle Rittenhouse as a hero. I don't see him as a victim. I see him as somebody who ended up in a bad situation due to bad decisions, which ultimately led him to having to defend himself. This is not to say that Kyle Rittenhouse should be uplifted, glorified, or to be put down and shamed. Now, I see a lot of comparisons being made where if Kyle Rittenhouse was a black guy, maybe he would have been treated differently. Maybe he wouldn't even be in the media at all. Maybe we wouldn't have this much attention. Now, I only bring that up is because there are situations where we know that Black people are committing certain behaviors and certain acts, just like when it comes to the Jewish community or to the Asian community, that goes overlooked in the media all the time. And we know that Black people or Black men are more likely to victimize Jewish people than white people, or victimize Chinese people over white people or other Chinese people. But we don't focus on that because it goes against the narrative that the left has decided to take the mantle on and focus on certain cases to combat systemic racism or biases or discrimination. Racism exists. It is a problem. Yes. Do I rank racism as one of the biggest problems that Black people face in America today? No. That does not diminish or ignore the fact that racism does play a part in some of the outcomes that Black people face in America. Two things can be true at once. It could be a problem, but it can also be overhyped and expanded to the point of absurdity. There are many other things that Black people are facing in America that can be confronted and fixed if we only put just as much attention or just as much resources into that as we do racism. Now, to wrap this all up in a nice bow, and I'm hopefully trying to break this down to the best of my ability, this is why I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse case is not political at all. We have judges, we have lawyers. This case happens to be on national television where people can decide for themselves what they believe. But what we should not ever do is take this as a referendum or some kind of endorsement on to go out and commit violence or to convict a group of people based on this one case. This case cannot be the one all be all. You take the win when you get the win. You take the loss when you get the loss, and you keep fighting and you keep pushing forward. But the fact that an 18-year-old, 17-year-old is now the pinnacle of debate in our country, and his life is being decided by people who have decided to take a hard line on one or the other based on their political ideology is absurd. We have reached a place where we are no longer thinking rational. And as a people, we cannot afford to keep going down this route. I implore you to hear the other person out, to try to have a rational, logical dialogue. And even if you walk away disagreeing with each other, do it with respect, because we cannot hang our hat on this one case. There are many other things going on in this country that we face. There are many injustices, many discriminations, and many other factors that we have to pay attention to. And if we allow one case to tear us apart, if we allow one circumstance and situation to divide us even further, we're never going to heal, and we're never going to hear what the other person has to say. I sympathize with both sides of the argument. And I will also say that it is very toxic. If you find yourself having a debate about this case or this situation, I ask that you take a deep breath, hear the other person out, and if you cannot have a decent conversation, then you should back out of the conversation and let the judges and let the lawyers and let the jury do their job. And you have to accept the outcome, because the moment you don't accept the outcome, what you're basically saying is that the outcome is only just when you agree with it. And I say that because both sides feel justified in what they want the verdict to be. Somebody has to lose in this. Somebody is going to get their way. I just hope that whatever happens, that it is the right thing. Now, I've given my opinion based on the evidence that I've seen and the laws that I understand, which is limited, and came to the conclusion that Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty of murder. I do not believe that he's a murderer. I do not believe that he went there to intentionally be an active shooter and to take people out. I really do not believe that. It has nothing to do with my race. It has nothing to do with my political ideology. It has everything to do with what I witnessed, what I experienced, what the evidence has presented so far, and that's my conclusion. If you come to a different conclusion, I respect that. But I ask that at the end of the day, we can still have a decent, rational conversation with one another and help heal. And there will always be a next thing that we will disagree about. But can we do it as a country? Can we do it as Americans? Can we do it as fellow human beings? So that is my take on it. And I hope that this has been insightful. I hope that you all give me your feedback and tell me what you think about it. No intro, no outro. Thank y'all so much for listening. And as always, and I say this to everyone, be peaceful and be great. Till next time, I'm out.